Please note this podcast discusses real-life crimes and may include sensitive topics such as violence, abuse, and other disturbing content. We recommend listener discretion.
He had an old telephone that he would search pornographic sites on. He would then take a photograph of the screen with a digital camera. We knew he took those photographs because actually his phone screen was cracked, and the photographs he took had his cracked screen on them.
I'm journalist Helen Fospero.
I'm crime reporter Martin Brunt.
And this is True Criminals.
A journey into the darkest corners of the criminal underworld with insights from decades of true crime reporting.
The stories behind the stories, plus exclusive interviews with those closely involved in notorious cases.
Re-examining crimes so shocking, they still haunt our imaginations.
So what can you tell me about the murder of Tia Sharp, Stuart? Stuart?
Well, a couple of minutes, you must listen, please.
This is the second of two episodes exploring the murder of 12-year-old Tia Sharp, who went missing from her grandmother's South London home in August 2012. The local community and police spent a desperate week searching. But Tia's body was ultimately discovered hidden in that same house, leading to the arrest of her grandmother's partner, Stuart Hazell, for her murder. In this second episode, we pick up the story of the dramatic court proceedings and aftermath of Tia's murder. And we'll have further invaluable insight from former Met Detective Chief Inspector Nick Scola, who led the investigation, on how officers built their case, including forensic and digital evidence which revealed Hazell's predatory behaviour. Martin, what are your memories of Stuart Hazell's trial?
When that trial began in May 2013 at the Old Bailey, I was there every day reporting for Sky News. By that time, the initial shock, I suppose, had passed. It had been many months since her murder. But the sense of tragedy was even heavier as those details emerged. I remember seeing Tia's mum, Natalie, arriving at court looking drained, supported by the family. Tia's father, Stephen Carter, was often there too, stoic but clearly shattered inside. Hazell was 37 by then. Each day he was brought into the dock flanked by security guards. On the first day of the trial, he pleaded not guilty to murder. So that meant that the prosecution had to lay out all the evidence to prove he deliberately killed Tia. I remember Hazell watching the proceedings, mostly with his head down. Occasionally he glanced up when particularly incriminating bits of evidence were discussed. As the trial went on, we, the journalists, were given access to key bits of evidence, police interviews and statements. And it was all pretty grim stuff.
What was the defence argument, Martin?
Through his defence team, Stuart Hazell floated the idea, the story, that Tia's death had been an accident. Specifically, Hazell suggested that Tia fell down the stairs and died accidentally, and that he panicked and hid her body. That was his narrative at the start of the trial. But the pathologist reported no visible trauma that could be a sign of such an accidental fall. So it seemed a far-fetched story and was quickly dismantled by the prosecution's evidence.
So what was the prosecution case?
They revealed forensic evidence that hadn't been made public before. That's not unusual. Hazell's semen was found on Tia's bed and on her clothes, proof of a sexual assault. Tia's blood was found on a belt that Hazell had been wearing when he was arrested. Very incriminating evidence. That belt, presumably, had been used in the attack or to restrain Tia. When those details were read out, I remember Tia's mum fled the courtroom in tears, not for the first time. She had to leave several times because the evidence was so graphic. The pathologist couldn't determine an exact cause of death due to the body's condition, but the theory was that Tia had been smothered by Hazell. Evidence indicated that Tia was killed overnight on the 2nd and 3rd of August, and police described how Tia's body was found, quote, carefully wrapped, unquote, in a sheet and black rubbish bags, and hidden deep in the loft behind some boxes. This showed clear intent to hide the crime, hardly the actions of someone who'd witnessed an accident.
She's got no problems at all. She's a happy-go-lucky golden angel. You know what I mean? She's perfect. There's no arguments, nothing we can think of, absolutely nothing.
Throughout all of this, Martin, how did Hazell look while all this was coming out?
Well, at first, he sat expressionless throughout most of it, occasionally looking up. But as the days went on, you could almost feel the weight bearing down on him as the prosecution evidence unravelled. And that included something almost unthinkable: photographs recovered from Hazell's memory card. Some files were deleted but forensically retrieved. They included voyeuristic images of Tia while she was alive, secretly recorded videos of her applying moisturiser to her legs and of her sleeping. That indicated Hazell's sexual interest in Tia. There was also at least one photograph that the prosecution claimed showed Tia after she was dead. Essentially, Hazell had taken a trophy picture, and without going into too much detail, it was Tia's naked body arranged in a grim sexual pose. It was displayed on giant screens in the court and, rather weirdly, was left up for several minutes after the evidence moved on.
And another powerful moment must have been when the jury was shown Hazell lying during an ITV interview that he gave during the search, where he feigned innocence and also concern and worry for her safety.
Yes, watching that replayed in the courtroom, knowing what we all knew by then, it was quite horrific. Hazell claimed in that interview that he was playing the role of bereaved grandparent, and that's exactly what he was doing, playing a role, performing. By the fourth day of the trial, there was a real shift. Hazell appeared agitated and was suddenly whispering with his lawyers more frequently. We could see all this very clearly from the press benches. Perhaps it was the cumulative effect of the evidence and the anguish of Tia's family finally getting to him. Whatever it was, on the fifth day of the trial, 13th of May 2013, I was in that press box, pen ready to take down more evidence, when the judge announced that Hazell wanted to change his plea. So Hazell stood up in the dock, looking down, and the murder charge was read to him again as it was at the start of the trial. This time, instead of pleading not guilty, after a brief pause, Hazell muttered, "Guilty." The reaction was immediate. I heard Natalie, Tia's mum, let out a cry, and she bolted again from the courtroom, sobbing. Tia's grandmother, Christine Bicknell, was wailing. Steve Carter, Tia's dad, broke down in tears. Elsewhere in the public gallery, people were gasping or shouting. One of Tia's relatives yelled an expletive at Hazell before the court officers restored order. I've seen a few of these dramatic courtroom moments, but nothing quite like that. No one expected Hazell to fold in that way because he'd been forcing the family to endure days of horrific evidence. I rushed outside to get the news out, reporting live that Hazell had finally admitted to killing Tia.
So given the guilty plea, the judge discharged the jury, I presume, and moved on to sentencing.
Yes, that came on the 14th of May. Hazell's late guilty plea didn't really give him much in terms of sentence reduction. His barrister, Lord Carlisle, argued that Hazell had had a chaotic life. His mother was a sex worker. He had a history of drug abuse, depression and self-harm, and there had been suicide attempts. His lawyer even said that Hazell probably did love Tia in some twisted way, and argued that pleading guilty was perhaps the first brave decision of his life. Those details might have been an attempt to avoid a whole-life tariff, but the judge, Mr. Justice Nichol, called Hazell an extremely dangerous individual and emphasised that he had put the family through needless agony by not pleading guilty sooner. The judge gave him the mandatory life sentence with a minimum term of 38 years. He said that he could have given him a whole life tariff, but he wasn't convinced and the prosecution hadn't been able to prove that the murder was sexually motivated. But the 38 years minimum sentence means that Hazell must serve that before he can even be considered for parole. And by then he'll be in his mid-70s, if he lives that long, and even then release is not guaranteed. It was one of the longest minimum terms for murder, although since we've got used to even longer sentences.
It's interesting to look at that sentence, and you can imagine why a lot of members of the public, and particularly Tia's family, still felt it wasn't harsh enough.
I think it's true to say that there were members of Tia's family who wished that the death penalty was still an option for the judge. Outside court, her father, Stephen Carter, told reporters, "In my opinion," he said, "it will not be enough. Hazell should serve his time and be hung. I do not see today's events as justice for Tia, merely a legal conviction." Those are very painful words, but they really do convey the depth of a father's grief and anger.
And Christine Bicknell, Tia's grandmother, wasn't charged with anything further after her initial arrest, was she?
We were all surprised at her arrest, but police at that time were still trying to unravel exactly what had happened and who had been involved. But she was ultimately cleared of suspicion and released, effectively exonerated of involvement. Her life was undoubtedly shattered. She'd lost her granddaughter and her partner, Stuart Hazell, in one fell swoop. And, on top of all that, she'd endured public humiliation and suspicion.
And I suppose a lingering question from the trial was motive, although having listened to some of the evidence that you outlined there, one would presume it was clear what the motive was. But why did Stuart Hazell do this, do you think?
Well, the evidence, you're right, does point strongly to a sexual motive, an escalating sexual obsession with Tia. Hazell probably groomed or at least fixated on Tia over time. Hence those voyeuristic images, the filming and the still images that he took on his camera. It's difficult to imagine that what he did came suddenly out of nowhere. Perhaps on that Thursday night she died, something triggered him to act on his impulses. Maybe he was drunk, or maybe Tia resisted some advance and he attacked her to stop her telling anybody. The prosecution suggested that Hazell killed Tia to silence her, just that. Possibly because she would have told others about his abuse. This was a theory that was floating around, that Hazell had made advances and Tia threatened to tell her mother, leading Hazell to murder her to avoid exposure. But it is only a theory, because only Hazell and Tia know what exactly happened. But it's a plausible narrative, though not something Hazell ever confirmed. In fact, Hazell never gave any kind of explanation for his actions. In prison, he wrote a letter to his father saying, "One mistake and my whole world has collapsed. My fault, I know. I'm not a bad person." That's a grim lack of true accountability or insight. Calling it one mistake really does grossly understate the deliberate cruelty of his crime.
Well, we've got former Met Detective Chief Inspector Nick Scola with us, Senior Investigating Officer on the Tia Sharp case. Nick, we'd like to discuss the police forensics and digital evidence that ultimately were so compelling that they forced Stuart Hazell to plead guilty. Explain to us how you built the case for trial.
Following the discovery of Tia's body, the whole house became a crime scene, and we started to have a much closer look at it. Another search team came in, and while searching, on this occasion, did a tremendous job and found hidden in a door frame an SD card that would fit a camera. And on that card were a number of images, some of which had been deleted, which essentially indicated Hazell's sexual interest in young girls. He wasn't a particularly IT-savvy man, and the phone signal and internet signal at the address where Tia was found was very poor. And so he had an old telephone that he would search pornographic sites on. And if he found anything he liked the idea of, he would then take a photograph of the screen with a digital camera. We knew he took those photographs because actually his phone screen was cracked. And the photographs he took on his digital camera actually had his cracked screen on them. So he could attribute everything on that SD card his phone. There were pictures of girls who looked like Tia. There were websites searched on that phone. Youngthroats.com, pretty little girl is. Another search was incest sex. Again, it showed an interest that he had in Tia, being part of the family that he now lived with. And clear searches that he had made for underage porn. And there was ultimately the incredibly disturbing picture that we strongly believe and felt able to prove that he took of Tia posed in a naked position after she was dead. And that was disturbing. So all of that pointed towards his interest in children. We established Tia's time of death would have been before she left to go to Croydon, as Hazell had said. So we had the time of death, we had the digital images.
In parallel with all that physical evidence, you had a lot of forensic analysis going on that proved very fruitful.
We also knew what clothing Tia was wearing when she met Hazell in Croydon the afternoon. She went back to their house. She was going to spend the weekend with her grandparents. We saw that on CCTV. When we found the body, we also found, wrapped up in other plastic bags and hidden with it, was the same clothing that she'd been wearing. So we knew she didn't change, which again pointed to her death being the day he met her. She hadn't put any other clothes on. In addition to that, his own clothing that we seized, we found on the inside of his belt, his semen and Tia's blood. So there was strong DNA evidence linking him to her. Other unusual aspects of the evidence, when we searched the house, there was only one toilet and that was upstairs, and there was no door on that toilet. So when Tia stayed, if she was bathing or on the toilet, anyone could walk past and look in. He explained he'd taken it off to decorate it and it wouldn't refit. We brought a carpenter round and it fitted again straight away. Also on the SIM card or the SD card, he'd filmed in the movie mode Tia asleep. He'd gone into her room and got up close to her, and I think on one occasion may have touched her while she was asleep and then zoomed away. The light switch in the room only had one screw in, and if you slid it up in the neighbouring room, you could look through into her bedroom as well. A lot of unusual things. Well, the toilet door was particularly bizarre, to have no toilet door in the house when the 12-year-old girl was staying. His logical argument was that it wouldn't go back was just wrong. He just clearly wanted to walk past the bathroom door when she was in there. So the forensic evidence, the digital evidence, he gave an account in prison that she had fallen down the stairs. He gave that account, someone broken her neck. Clearly, she didn't have any similar injuries, and we can't be absolutely certain how she did die. The pathologist believed it was most likely through someone laying on top of her, preventing her from breathing that way.
All of this evidence was presented to Hazell's defence in the pre-trial phase, as is required. They must have known, Nick, that it was going to be an uphill battle to try and contest all of that.
I think you'd have to ask them that. From my perspective, I didn't have any doubts that the evidence would convict him. Was slightly surprised that he pleaded not guilty, although he did change his plea halfway through, but not before. He'd put Tia's parents through quite gruelling evidence about the photograph had to be shown from the pathologist. So he still made them suffer more than needed.
Nick, what about Hazell's motive and psychological profile? Had there been any warning signs that you think that might have prevented this happening? That's maybe a question for social services rather than the police.
Yeah, there was nothing in his background. He had convictions for violence and drug dealing. Nothing in his background immediately indicated that he was a danger to women or a danger to children.
After the murder, Nick, Hazell's behaviour was textbook in some ways. He hid the body, attempted to cover up evidence, and then tried to integrate himself into the search to deflect any suspicion. And we've seen a similar pattern in episodes we've covered, for example, on Ian Huntley, the Soham murderer, and Vincent Tabak, who killed Joanna Yates. Is this something you've seen before?
Yes, it's quite interesting when the family or a suspect does become involved. On occasions, I've dealt with similar instances where the family wear T-shirts with a mobile phone number on to ask the public to ring this number if they've got any information. And then if you've got a suspect within the family, on one investigation I found out that suspect was actually using that mobile phone number to vet the witnesses, blocking useful information coming to us. So you need to be very cautious when anyone within the family is getting too involved. Clearly, you understand their need to help, but you have to dissuade them as much as possible because, A, if there is a suspect amongst their number they don't understand, he could interfere with the investigation. And B, sometimes their enthusiasm just takes the investigation the wrong way. We had lots of local people on the estate wanting to help. They were leafleting around the estate. They wanted to come and help you do searches. And if you have got a suspect within that group, you don't particularly want them doing the search, because if they knew there was a crime scene, they would try and get there first, and A, they could contaminate it, or if later on we found a body and found evidence then being there, because I was part of the search. So on this occasion, there were many people wanted to help us, so they were directed to search areas of open ground where I was relatively confident there would be no real evidence there. For all their enthusiasm, if you search anywhere, you will find unusual items, you will find shoes, you will find items of clothing, and their help becomes a hindrance. In respect, you have to then deploy exhibit officers and photographers to seize and document everything they find, although you're reasonably confident there is nothing to do with the investigation.
Nick, what lasting memories do you have of the trial?
The lasting memory was having to display the image of Tia posed naked after she was dead. That was a difficult one. The prosecution wanted to display it in their opening, so the TV screens had to be set up so as not to be seen from the public gallery, but the judge, the barristers, and the defendant needed to see them. But I've been difficult enough showing it to the parents. I spoke to the family. The parents are separating both sets. I explained to them we'd got this image and gave them the option if they wanted to see it or not. Now, they chose to see it, so it was hard taking it to show it to them. And again, it was hard when it was shown in court, knowing the family knew what everyone was looking at, having to look at their dead naked daughter. So that was difficult. That was the only difficult moment in the trial, and that's the only real moment that stands out in my mind.
I remember that very vividly. Who wouldn't? But that picture was kept up for about 10 minutes, long after the evidence had moved on. It was almost as though somebody had forgotten that it was there and we were all staring at it.
It's not my memory of it. I'm not saying Martin's wrong by any means. It's not something I focused on enormously. The evidence may have been moving on, but I'm certainly not aware of anyone deliberately leaving it up there. And bearing in mind the judge could see it as well, I'm sure he would very quickly have said if he had stayed up there too long. So yeah, different perceptions.
I have a very vivid memory of that, and I'm not suggesting, Nick, that somebody left it up there deliberately. I was just astonished how long it was up on those very big screens, because it was the most appalling photograph.
Yeah, I'm sure it wasn't left up intentionally. If it was left up for that long, sometimes shocking images affect us all differently, don't they? Perhaps if you're not as used to seeing it, it may feel like it's been up a long time. By that time, I'd seen the image, unfortunately, on many occasions, so it was less impactful on me, probably.
And what about when Hazell was finally found guilty, Nick? What was that like for you and your team?
However strong your evidence, however confident you are in it, it's always a relief to get the guilty verdict. It's more of a relief that he changed his plea to guilty during the trials. There could be no doubt he was accepting his guilt. Sometimes there's celebration in a guilty verdict. In this occasion, it was just relief that the job was done. It is not something anyone particularly wanted to dwell on or be over-congratulatory. It was just the job was done. Stuart Hazell is going to go to prison for a long time. When Stuart Hazell was on remand in prison, he had at least 2 letters from women. I'll give you an example of what they wrote. Dear Stuart, I hope this letter finds you well. It what must be a very hard time for you. I really hope you don't mind me writing to you. I've never done anything like this before. But after I saw and heard you on the telly, I can't believe the things you're being accused of or what the people are saying about you. It must be so hard to hear people who are supposed to be close to you telling lies, which is why I thought I'd drop you a line. I'm 27 and a mum to two beautiful girls who are my life. I split with their dad shortly after the youngest was born and brought the two of them up on my own ever since. Clearly, it's a form of honey trap. He's on remand for murdering a young girl, and a woman has written to him and put in the letter that she's divorced with two young girls. I can only suspect that she was hoping to strike up a conversation with him and maybe then later sell a story to the media saying, I was Stuart Hazell's pen pal in prison. I really don't get it. Perhaps had there been more time in the investigation, we could have gone and seen this lady to establish what was going on. But it was the kind of unusual background chatter you get, like the psychics, and I've heard you talk about on the show before this, what do you do when psychics give you information? I generally do a decision in my SO log that information from psychics will be discarded. We may have a little look at them, see if they may have first-hand knowledge of it. They don't want to tell us and are perhaps saying they're psychics. This is how the knowledge got to them. So we make sure they've got no first-hand or connection investigation, because it all takes investigative time and you really want to focus on your main lines of inquiry, not all these little bits that feature around the edges of it.
Nick, that's a fascinating and rather offbeat side to the Tia Sharp story.
We also had on that one when Stuart Hazell gave the press interview, didn't he? Without telling us, that becomes a bit of a shock. Your potential suspects on TV. But it's interesting if you actually got the raw data of that through a court order. And It's interesting, Stuart Hazell, when he's on there talking, if you ever get a chance to watch, he talks really freely and openly about all the events of the afternoon. And then he's asked what happens on the Friday morning. And of course, he's got to make that up because he's dead by then.
Yeah.
And you can genuinely see a difference. He's gone from a free recall to an and an ah and averting the eyes. I've never really seen that before, so that was interesting.
Tia's come down the stairs around about half 10, 11, something like that maybe. Because I know she was on about going up to Croydon for about, she wanted to get up early. She picked your mum's DS up, played the DS for a little while. I said, well, we're going to have some breakfast. So I made her some toast, and she had the toast, and then she wanted a sausage roll, because she's always eating sausage rolls. Basically, then she was sitting there. She doesn't take her washing up out, so I took her washing up out. Just started doing a bit of washing up in the kitchen. She was in there. She was telling me what she was doing, but I weren't really logging it into my head. I didn't. Do you know what I mean? Remember, like the kids, they talk to you, it goes in one ear, stays there for a second, it goes out, you know what I mean? As I was hoovering, then she walked past me from the front room to go out. And she walked out the front door, that is all I know. And she left her phone on charge, because I told her to sit there and leave her phone on charge. I didn't mean leave it on charge, because what Tia doing, she plays on the BB thing, but then she uses it as it's charging, so there's no charge going through to it. So when I said to her, just leave your phone on charge, it means leave her phone on charge, not use it, let it charge up a bit, then you can actually take it with you or whatever, because she's been responsible to go to Croydon before. She's been responsible to go on trains and buses and trams and everything before on her own. She said, goodbye. I said, well, make sure you're back at 6. She went, yeah. And that was it, and then the door closed and she walks out. I don't take precise times and things like that, but when she walked out that door, I know damn well it was 12:10. I called into my clock, because as I was hoovering up the dog's mess by my kitchen, I look up and I've got a great big clock in front of me on the cooker which says 12:10. Oh, it's been horrible. It's been horrible. Do you know what I mean? The family's... We're stuck inside here, do you know what I mean? We've got all the papers outside, all putting accusations down, and they asked me stupid questions yesterday, like, oh, did you do anything? I said, well, no, I didn't. Excuse my language, but no, I didn't. I'd never think of that. I'd loved her to bits. She's like my own daughter, for God's sake. We had that sort of relationship. It was that sort of thing. It was just, you know, she wanted it, she got it. She's got a loving home. She's never gone without anything, so I can't work it out. What the hell's going on? We're all out there, they want to report the truth. Well, if they believe what they read in the papers, they can do whatever they like, because I know deep down in my heart that Tia walked out of my house. She walked out of there, and I know damn well, because she was seen walking down the pathway. I know she made that track down to that way. What happened after that is I don't know.
Nick, I know you must have been annoyed at the time if you had no prior notice that Hazell was going to do that interview. I was annoyed because he gave it to one of my rivals. But ultimately, because he behaved so differently about his memory of the crucial hours when Tia disappeared, it must have been of some help to you.
Not really. You didn't get that until after he was charged anyway. So a bit like, was it the Joanna Yates, Jeffries, they decided the landlord was the suspect. So you do as many interviews as you can with a potential suspect whilst he's not been charged or anything. And so they've got something in the can for him. So I'm never quite sure why that happened. It was a bit distasteful, really. Not even having the courtesy to say we're doing it.
Yeah,
sneaking into the family. Well, one of the problems with this case, it was so soon I was at the Leveson inquiry.
Yeah.
Everyone was terrified of talking to the press.
Yes.
I wasn't, but you got warned off. Prior to the Nisha Patel, we had a pre-trial briefing, went through the case at the yard, all the crime correspondence there, so you knew what was coming and what was happening. But it was a different environment with Hogan Howe in charge. It was more of an environment of fear, as opposed to Ian Blair was a mistake was a learning opportunity. It went from that to a mistake being a disciplinary opportunity.
One last thought. I do remember you had in one of those press conferences Chris Webb on your left-hand side, and he's a great old mate of mine. He was very, very helpful in those days when you couldn't, or your officers couldn't talk to us. Yeah. Chris kept us up to speed without revealing anything he shouldn't have done.
Yeah, that's the way it should work.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely the way it should work.
Nick, thank you very much for joining us. It's been fascinating to get your insights. It is one of the most appalling cases I've covered. And I guess the same for you. So thank you for sharing those, I guess, often painful memories.
Really appreciate your time, Nick. Thank you so much for doing this for us.
Thank you.
On the media side, Martin, this case reaffirmed the power of media to help. So, for example, spreading information quickly, but also, I suppose, the responsibility we carry.
Yeah, we always like to think we can help on occasions. ITV interviewed Stuart Hazell as a concerned grandparent figure, essentially airing his lies. Now, in hindsight, that seems a bit uncomfortable, but I also know that by doing that possibly kept him under pressure. It's a double-edged sword. Nowadays, many news outlets have become more cautious when interviewing family in active cases, mindful that sometimes one of them could be a suspect, or equally could be a witness, and perhaps a witness who gives evidence in a trial. We try to let the police do their job and not inadvertently give a platform to a criminal. However, we have to balance that with giving families a voice to plead for help, which can be crucial. Now, sometimes the police are all for us doing such interviews, literally putting a potential suspect under the spotlight just so the police can see how they react.
On one hand, we saw a beautiful outpouring of community support, lots of people wanting to take part in the search, etc. People really came together to look for Tia, one of their own, and to comfort her family. But on the other hand, once the truth emerged, that support in some quarters turned to rage. I remember that after Hazell's arrest, a mob gathered outside a court appearance and police had to manage the crowd.
They did. I covered all those court appearances, and I do remember the public reaction. Hazell's first appearance at the Old Bailey was by a video link, but later, when he was actually brought to court from prison, people would shout and bang on the prison van. And online, it was particularly vicious. The family, like Tia's mum and gran, had to disconnect from social media because of trolls and the threats that were made against them. And as we've seen in other cases, like the Madeleine McCann case, high-profile investigations can attract vicious commentary. As journalists, we try to be very clear about who was accused and who wasn't. Sky News and others emphasised that Christine Bicknell was not charged with anything related to the murder. Even after she had been questioned, she was released, no further action. She was a grieving grandmother, another victim of Hazell's betrayal, if you like. But, unfortunately, mud sticks for some people, and eventually Christine had to move away from the area.
We've spoken about lots of different characters in this case, but before we end, I think it's important to spend a moment focusing on Tia. Through all the coverage, we heard relatively little about what she was like. But from what family and teachers said, Tia was a friendly, bubbly girl. She loved music, texting her friends. She had younger siblings whom she adored. There were photos of her smiling with a cheeky grin. Those are how she should be remembered, not the awful way she died.
Yes, sometimes when we discuss true crime, the focus is very much on the criminal. I guess that's for obvious reasons. But it's always important to remember that the victim's life mattered deeply. 12-year-old, a whole future ahead of her. Who knows what Tia might have made of her life? Now she'd be 25 years old, maybe in a career, maybe starting a family of her own. All of that was stolen from her in a moment of extreme violence.
And although we interview hardened detectives who are used to dealing with very sad, very grim cases, I think we saw a flash of Nick, the man, when he described having to take the picture of Tia naked after she died to the family.
I can't imagine what that scene must have been like, because I saw that picture and without going into graphic detail, it was the most undignified picture of a body, and they think by that stage she was dead, posed in a very sexual setup. And as Nick and I discussed, my perception was that it was put on the screen in court for much longer than was absolutely necessary.
When all was said and done, Martin, do you feel justice was served?
Well, yes, it was, of course, legally. Hazell was convicted and got a very severe sentence, one of the heaviest for a single murder. Life, that was mandatory, but the minimum he's got to serve is 38 years, and that means he's likely to die in prison, given his age. But emotionally, many felt nothing could truly compensate for taking Tia's life, and I think that's true of all, particularly murders of young children. Her father, Stephen, said outside the court that in his opinion, Hazell should be hanged, that even life in prison wasn't enough. I've heard that many times, particularly from grieving parents. Tia's mum, Natalie, said, "I do not see today's events as justice for Tia, merely a legal conviction." Well, again, people can sympathise with that view. Those kind of phrases encapsulate how, for a family, even the best outcome in court still feels hollow. They lost their child forever. From my perspective as an observer, I did feel that the justice system worked here in terms of its process. Hazell was caught, evidence was gathered meticulously, he was given a fair trial, and when he was confronted with overwhelming evidence, he caved in and changed his plea to guilty. In doing so, he spared the family further agony, more evidence that they would have heard of exactly what he did to Tia. The judge's sentence was appropriately harsh, and there was no technicality that let him off lightly. So, to sum up, he's where he belongs, behind bars, and I guess he'll remain there for the rest of his life.
Hey listeners, your support means everything to us. If you're enjoying the podcast, please take a moment to leave us a review. It helps us grow, reach new listeners, and keep bringing you the stories you love. This episode is brought to you by Audio Bleach Global. Our producer is Russell Barnes, with audio production by Andrew Chappell. The original score was composed by Chap Mannequin, artwork by Bleached, executive produced by Lee Mann. Follow True Criminals on Instagram at true.criminals and on YouTube at youtube.com/@true-criminals. For exclusive content and ways to support the show, visit us at patreon.com/True Criminals. For partnership opportunities, please contact us at contact@audiobleachglobal.com.